Hello, and welcome to today's conversation, Tech Regulation Beyond Big Tech. I'm Bennett Richardson, president of Protocol. Thank you for joining us today. Everyone's favorite, Ben Brody, Protocol senior reporter, co-author of Protocol Policy, our moderator for today's conversation, to introduce our speakers and get us started. Ben, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bennett. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event, Tech Regulation Beyond Big Tech. As Bennett said, I'm Ben Brody, a senior policy reporter here at Protocol, and I'm going to be your moderator. One of the things that's easy to miss because of congressional gridlock and years of disappointments is that tech regulation is already happening. Europe, just in the last 6 weeks, is moving ahead on competition and content. More states are passing privacy laws or coming to deals on gig labor. Federal agencies are looking at rules, courts are weighing in. Some of the big players are even changing market standards by altering their own practices. A lot of this conversation, including by me, has focused on the biggest players. What will happen to the App Store? How often should Google be able to keep searchers on its own properties? Do privacy laws entrench Meta? But contained within each of these questions are urgent issues for decidedly non-giant and not even very big companies that still use tech or are digital natives. What will happen to apps generally? Do companies that advertise need to pull back? This panel is about those issues, and it's for the vast majority of businesses out there and the customers that shop at them. To help us out, I'm joined by three great panelists. Going alphabetically, we have Awesta Sarkash. She's the Government Affairs Director at the group Small Business Majority. She was previously Director of Advocacy and Communications at the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development. Next is Christine Bannon, the U.S. Public Policy Manager for Proton. She was previously a policy counsel at New America's Open Technology Institute and a consumer protection counsel at the Electronic Privacy Information Center. And last but not least, we have Michael Petricone, the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Consumer Technology Association, which basically makes him the longtime DC guy at CES. So welcome to all of you. Let's get started. This is kind of a level-setting question for everyone, but I'd like to put it to Awesta first. What do you think makes this moment in policy, tech policy specifically, unique? And how should small and medium-sized businesses be preparing for it?
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to Protocol for having us here today. Again, my name is Awesta Sarkash. I'm the Government Affairs Director at Small Business Majority, a national small business organization that empowers America's diverse entrepreneurs to build a thriving and equitable economy. I think this is a unique moment in policy because we're at sort of a nexus of post-COVID, post-pandemic, and also this influx of tech regulation. I think from the perspective of small business owners, there is a growing uneven playing field between small and large companies and under-regulated technology platforms, corporate consolidations, and pernicious business practices that dramatically restrict markets and stifle competition. And so for small businesses who've been really impacted the past 2 years, this is a moment where we can make some vital changes. Small businesses, more often than not, tend to be at a disadvantage compared to larger ones. And of course, that was exacerbated during the pandemic. And so they want to see these changes that promote fair competition instead of sort of inhibiting competition that makes America's small businesses thrive. So I think we're sort of at a nexus here where small businesses are looking for continued support. And one key way to do that is by promoting fair competition.
Michael, what makes this moment unique?
Sure. And again, I'm with the Consumer Technology Association, and we come at this from an interesting angle in that we represent pretty much every American leader, including all the ones affected by the bills. But 80% of our members are small businesses, right? We really see kind of the complex and symbiotic relationship between both. In terms of what makes this a unique moment, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. And that is that the critical factor in America's economic and military leadership since World War II has been our global leadership in advanced technology, right? And this leadership is now more tenuous than it's been in decades. China is spending billions to catch up and surpass U.S. tech leaders. This isn't like a secret. They talk about it all the time, and they use everything they can, investments, state-sponsored espionage, subsidies. And they're doing it because they know the stakes, right? Because the country that dominates in advanced technologies will also dominate diplomatically, economically, militarily. and they will be the leading, whatever company wins will be the leading company or the lead country in the next era. So as we go forward, we got to realize three things, right? Number one, we're in a competition for technology, and it's a competition for our future economic prosperity and security. Number two, that China is a pure adversary who can beat us. And the idea that American technologies are the world standard, that English is the global language, and the dollar is the global currency is not to be taken for granted. And three, that all of our policies need to be looked at in the context of, does this help or hurt American competitiveness? So, give you an example. Right now, over the last few decades, U.S. federal R&D has dropped. China R&D has increased radically, right? The 5 companies impacted by these bills are among the top companies in R&D spending. So if we crack down on those 5 companies and make them weaker, what's the impact of that from a competitiveness standpoint? So right now, we're following a policy that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? We're simultaneously trying to pass a massive bill to help U.S. competition with China, while targeting and weakening our leading technology companies and R&D spenders, right? So that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think because this is a unique time, we really need to step back and slow down and figure out just exactly what problem we're trying to solve.
Christine, I want to bounce it to you, especially maybe for your sense of the international moment.
Sure. So if you're not familiar with Proton, we're a privacy technology startup. We offer Proton Mail, end-to-end encrypted email, and Proton VPN. We're based in Switzerland, which puts us in an interesting position because we're based in a European country that's not in the EU. So we're really value our independence and are involved in both the European and American privacy and competition regulation conversations. So yeah, if it's a really exciting time for Europe. DMA is in its final stages now. We're excited.
The Digital Markets Act, the European competition rules.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we have supported it as a company. It's an ambitious piece of legislation. We're excited about that will allow different payment methods in the App Store and ban self-preferencing from the major gatekeepers. Those are the two parts that are most relevant to us. But yeah, we think the value of the legislation, like any legislation, will come down to enforcement. So it's an exciting time to see how this will play out and how the U.S. will take up this moment. I think it's a unique time of consensus on the Hill. The committee votes have gone really well for both pieces of Senate legislation. It's a very different sense than I've had when I've been advocating for comprehensive privacy legislation. I think there is much in common from what both parties value and want to accomplish here. And just to address the geopolitical point, I think that it is true. We're in a unique time for competition with China and threats from Russia. But I will say, I think that America's technology strength historically has come from the innovators and the startups. And when monopolists are entrenched, they become stagnant and aren't the same innovators that they used to be. So we really need to open up more opportunities for other businesses to compete and offer things that will continue to set us apart as technology leaders.
And just for the audience a little bit, I think we're talking especially about Senator Klobuchar's kind of tech non-discrimination legislation, which is moving ahead on the Hill, as well as legislation that would change kind of how app stores run. Awesta, I want to take this to you. You talked about the sense that particularly the economic and social conditions of the last 2 years, the big have gotten bigger, somewhat at the expense of the small. How do the businesses that you work with translate that into particular policy priorities?
I think for a lot of the small businesses that we're representing, and we're talking about micro businesses, entrepreneurs of color, women-owned businesses, basically the types of businesses in America that employ 80% of our workforce, are really looking at this situation as how is this either benefiting my ability to compete or inhibiting it. We've done some research back in March of this year that shows that a lot of these businesses are struggling with things like predatory practices, including self-preferencing, copycatting, they're being negatively impacted by loyalty discounts. And a strong majority of these small business owners believe that it's an issue. And so to Christine's point, totally true. I think so in situations where small businesses are feeling like they're not able to compete, especially post-pandemic, this is really impacting them. And they want to see legislation passed that would ensure that they're protected, like through the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. Those types of legislation ensure that online platforms are not engaging in discriminatory behavior like self-preferencing. And so this is a really critical moment for them.
Michael, I want to bring you in here a little bit. You mentioned the kind of bifurcation in your membership. You have mostly small folks and startups, almost all digital natives, tons of apps, but you have the big folks as well. How do you find that your membership, big and small, kind of relate to one another? And especially, how do the small folks think about some of this competition legislation that might not be aimed at them, but is trying to help them?
Yeah, first of all, the U.S. is blessed, right? Uniquely blessed in having the world's global technology leaders and having the world's most vibrant startup economy, right? And that puts us in a unique position and one that we want to protect. It's a good thing. I do want to push back a little bit on the idea of just the health of the startup economy. The group Engine, which represents startups, just released a report called The State of the Startup Economy. And what that report shows, and I'd encourage everybody to read it, it's really well done, is that the startup ecosystem in the US is thriving. Right? Pretty much every metric of success, seed and angel rounds, Series A, venture capital as a whole, the number of startup fundings, like every one of those metrics is up over the past decade. And the report also showed a strong positive correlation between investment and acquisition. In other words, that when startups sell, what the founder often does is they take that successful exit and go back and use it for investment in new startups, right? Which we always kind of knew, but it was interesting to have that quantified. And even in 2021, which was a weird year for all of us, U.S. venture capital funds raised a record $128 billion, which is a 47% increase over the previous record, which was set the previous year in 2020. So, I'm sure there are multiple ways of looking at it, but if you look at the numbers, it looks like the U.S. startup economy is thriving as it should be, and we certainly want to keep that going.
Christine, you recently participated in Antitrust Day. This was kind of the kickoff by a coalition of grassroots civil society and big tech rivals pushing for these competition reforms, including the American Choice and Innovation Online Act, Senator Klobuchar's bill. What were you hearing back from lawmakers about their priorities as you kind of started this push? And do you find that they have, particularly the ones who may not have followed these issues the last couple of years, that they have gotten up to speed enough that they could act by year's end?
Yeah, well, we got a really positive response from Antitrust Day. It was 113 organizations and companies that joined and supported this push and encouraged people to contact their lawmakers about the legislation. I think we got about 70,000 people to contact the representatives. And this has been, it's been really well received. I think there is still room to go in terms of education on the Hill. The members that have been on the committee are very well informed and very engaged, and members off committee are getting up to speed. But I still feel optimistic about our chances for the year's end. The leadership's really committed to this on both the House and the Senate side. So I think that there is a chance. You never want to forecast too much in Washington, but I'll say that, yeah, we're working hard to explain to different offices why this is important to us, why we think that the Open App Markets Act will improve competition for developers and improve the services offered to consumers, and why the American Innovation and Choice Act will just open up more opportunities for startups like us to offer products that are more privacy protective and just something different than what is the status quo. And we think that users, when given a choice, really tend to choose the more privacy protective option. So that's where we're coming from. And I'm still feeling the energy on the Hill and the optimism for this Congress.
Michael, is that your sense as well? You may be talking to different lawmakers, but I am particularly curious about your sense from leadership.
Yeah, I mean, my sense in talking to lawmakers, look, both these bills are unusual, or just speaking of the Senate bill, of course, and the House package, in that they're highly complex bills that were kind of brought through without any legislative hearing. Right? There was no legislative hearing. There was no opportunity for witnesses to raise issues, and certainly on the House side and the Senate side. My sense with rank and file members, well, on and off the committee, is the more they find out about exactly what the bills would do, the more questions they raise, right? In terms of potentially breaking services that millions of people use every day, like Prime, or banning pre-installed apps find, or Google Apps with information restrictions on acquisitions. These are all difficult issues, and I think they come from the fact, like, the fatal flaw of these bills is they target specific companies as opposed to targeting a problem, right? So then when the market cap of one of the companies targeted drops and they fall out of the category, then everybody wonders what to do. But that's not, again, that's what happens when you decide to target specific actors as opposed to target the issue. And I think the other thing that members are wondering is, like, who's asking for this? I don't think constituents are, right? I mean, are constituents really calling their member of Congress and saying, I want my deliveries to be slower, or my products to be more expensive, or my phone to be less functional? That doesn't sound likely to me. So I think what members would like to do, and we certainly encourage, is go at this, with a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. Figure out what problems we're trying to resolve. And I think probably all of us on this forum would agree on, like a national privacy standard. And then go to work and solve those issues.
Westa, I want to bring you in. Who do you find is asking for this? Is it just small business majority, or does this kind of reflect the will of your membership?
Well, I think we have a really strong bottom-up approach. We hear from small businesses every day. We have offices across the country, and so for us, when we do surveys, for instance, and 80% of small business owners report that they want enforcement of antitrust laws and other provisions protecting small business owners against anti-competitive practices, that's pretty clear to us that we need to be doing something on behalf of them and with their help and advocacy to push these types of legislation forward. I will say that for folks who are touching on that, there's this huge influx of startups and entrepreneurs. That is true, but the approach and the barriers don't look the same for everyone. They're particularly different for women, for people of color. And so for those folks, especially when they're trying to get their foot in the door, but there's already these egregious practices of self-preferencing, copycatting, using data to make it make it difficult for the small business to actually compete on these platforms, that is a problem. And so competition, and fair competition specifically, is something that we hear from our small businesses all the time. And 76% of them support specific prohibitions of predatory practices and practices that would make it harder for small businesses to compete. So to us, that's pretty loud and clear.
Gotcha. Michael, I want to start with you on this, but I think everyone might have a sense and should be able to jump in. This is kind of a threshold issue that I think I could have actually started with. And it's, how much do you find small and to a certain extent medium-sized businesses, the ones you deal with, are even thinking about regulation? How aware are they of these issues? How prepared do they feel? And is it different, B2B versus B2C, brick and mortar versus digital native, those kinds of things?
Well, first of all, I do want to go back to Awesta and say that increasing representation in the tech industry is a critically important priority, and that's something that we should all be working on. CTA has we 2 years ago started a $10 million fund that we're giving to VCs who invest in underrepresented communities, and that's again an important priority. I'm not sure if we agree that antitrust laws is the way to go about doing that, but we completely agree on the bottom line. In terms of small businesses, yeah. So when you come to CES, which I hope you all do, there's an area. I probably shouldn't say what my favorite area of CES is, but I'm going to do it. It's called Eureka Park, and it's a couple of thousand startups looking for funding, right? And the energy there is amazing. You go to any booth and you're talking to the founder. She's talking about her product and how she's invested her life in it, how it's going to change the world. And most of those companies are there, or a lot of them are there, to be seen and acquired by larger companies, right? Because that's the exit strategy for the founder. Like the other exit strategy is to take the company public, and it's a much longer time horizon. And as we talked about before, a lot of these founders sell the company and then go back and then start another company, and that's how the ecosystem works. So I think for most of these small businesses, they're not following the ins and outs of DC every day. All they want to do is to be able to build their businesses and take advantage of means to allow them to do that, right? They want to be able to continue to sell their business to larger companies if they want. They want to continue to be able to use services like AWS or social media or a lot of these services that they use, again, that kind of symbiotic with the big platforms, that allows like any small business to have like massive web capabilities or to market all over the world and have that level of brand recognition, even if the person is starting a company from her dorm room, right? So their main priority is for Congress not to do anything that would in any way like screw up or weaken any of these services that they rely on to build their businesses. So I think that's the small businesses that I talk to, that's where they're coming from.
Ben, can I add something too?
Sure.
I feel like it's definitely true. I mean, I think small businesses appreciate these platforms because they do have this literal platform to reach more customers and consumers and ultimately support their bottom lines. I think the critical thing here is making sure that these platforms don't require the small business to do things that they're unaware of. We've done research that shows a lot of small businesses didn't even understand the contracts that they were signing on to. They didn't understand why they were being forced to advertise. And all of these sorts of things undermine their actual bottom lines. And so in that regard, they want to make sure that they're utilizing and taking advantage of the platform as much as possible so that they can support the communities that they're in, they can hire more employees and basically become a scalable business. But they can't do that if the practices are predatory.
Christine, there's an angle here that I think you're sort of uniquely suited to talk to, which is that regulation isn't just state and federal, but international, as you kind of talked about earlier, particularly when you're talking to other app companies, your sort of peers in this digital space that can operate all over the world. What do you tell them about preparing for, how prepared they need to be for European regulation and what they need to do?
Yeah, well, in terms of startups and smaller companies, there aren't compliance costs for antitrust regulation in the same way you'd think about compliance costs for maybe privacy legislation, right? Like the way that the Digital Markets Act has defined the scope of the application of these regulations is slightly different and slightly broader than the current bills under consideration in the US. But it still only apply to a pretty small number of companies with a huge market cap, huge number of users. So in terms of like worrying about compliance, I think it's negligible. But in terms of looking forward to how this would affect the companies, so to use us as an example, because that's what I can speak the best to, but this applies to any app that's affected, but we're now going to be able to communicate directly with our users in the EU. So before there are restrictions on what we're allowed to say in and out of the App Store, we can't say You can go to our website and get a different deal here versus paying 30% more to get it through the App Store. And we have to use the in-app payment system that Apple requires instead of requiring like alternate payment systems that are used by other apps in the App Store. So it offers a lot of flexibility. It puts less financial strain on startups that are digital goods and are subscription or in-app payment based, which Apple takes 30% cut, and Google is slightly different but similar. So that's the App Store perspective. And for the self-preferencing and defaults perspective, we're very optimistic that the ban on self-preferencing will allow other players to get more exposure to users. Ultimately, this isn't about favoring smaller players over the larger players. It's about giving the smaller players a chance to be seen by the users, give the users a chance to choose someone other than the default, make defaults easy to change. That's a big problem we face now. One of the specific provisions of the DMA requires, I call it like choice screens for 3 services. So it's browser, search, and voice assistant. We were lobbying for email to be one of those, but we did not get it. That's one thing we would change about the legislation. But these core platform services, right, are and email, I think particularly, is our like passport to the rest of the internet. You really need it to make an account anywhere. For the Android system, Gmail is the default. It unlocks the rest of the entire system. So it's really important to be able to give users a choice, like an opportunity to choose something else, and to facilitate that choice.
Michael, I wonder if I can sort of bring you to privacy here for a moment. Connecticut, just in the last few days, has become the 5th state to have a privacy law. How are those sort of less than big tech companies and startups that you're dealing with thinking about the progression of privacy laws across states? I assume they want a federal law. It does make things easy. But do they see the states going too hard on things like global opt-outs that might make it more difficult to collect data? Do they see it going too friendly to some of the big players? How are they thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue for small businesses and startups, and one that I would hope we can all agree with on this panel. Yeah, I mean, the reason it's such an important issue is because if you're a small business, if you're a startup, you don't have like hundreds of lawyers. You don't have a massive compliance budget, right? So as we're evolving toward a system, unfortunately, the way the trend line is going, where we have like multiple incompatible patchwork quilts of state privacy laws, that puts startups in a very difficult position. Right? If you're a big company and you got a lot of lawyers, then it's something that you can deal with, and it's a business expense. If you're trying to start your company in your dorm room and you've got to comply with this patchwork quilt of state laws, that's almost untenable for you, right? So that's why certainly one of our top priorities is to get Congress to enact the federal privacy framework. And certainly there are some issues with that and debates over preemption and private right of action. But my sense in Congress is there's growing momentum for this. There are conversations among policymakers. We're having conversations. And from a small business standpoint and from an American competitiveness standpoint, because business needs, they need clear rules of the road, and they need regulatory clarity to invest. This would be just a great thing to get done by the end of the year.
Christine, I want to bounce it to you. Do you think Congress can do both of those things, and do you think it should be doing both of those things?
I definitely think it should. I think it's unlikely for this Congress to pass both privacy and antitrust legislation, though I will be rooting for them every step of the way if they do, and as involved as I can. I think it has, for the reasons Michael mentioned, it has been hard to reach some consensus on a couple sticking point issues, though I do believe there is pretty good consensus on the fundamental issues about user rights and what should the obligations of companies be, but the private right of action and preemption have been difficult hurdles for Congress. There haven't been really hearings or action this Congress, but I think it's something that we as different stakeholders need to keep pushing for and not let Congress forget about this important issue. It's really so overdue, by, I don't know, a decade. It's really far past time. So I think we should need to keep the pressure up, but I can't say that I think it's likely for this Congress.
Wes, I want to bring this to you. Talk about, you talked about the last couple of years and how they've been sort of incredibly remarkable for small businesses. Talk about the current business and economic landscape. How's it affecting small entrepreneurs? Everything from inflation to the labor landscape. How are they thinking about that, and what do they most need from regulation right now?
Well, I think the outlook for a lot of small businesses still sort of remains unclear. The impact of the past 2 years obviously hits differently when you are a small business, especially a micro small business. Some of our research and data shows that almost 30% of small businesses don't think that they will survive more than a year. Obviously, that is scary to think about when we think about the number of businesses that have already gone under during the pandemic. And so I think what they're looking for right now is innovative policy solutions and solutions that ensure that they're able to compete as fairly as possible, including supporting tax incentives that would encourage more entrepreneurship and development. We've also heard from a lot of small businesses that taking a look at standardized licensing as a way to spur more entrepreneurial development as well is critical. But I think in conjunction with this fair competition is also ensuring that there's innovative forms of capital. A lot of these small businesses were relying on funding opportunities over the past 2 years that came in the form of grants. And so we need to push policies that recognize that small businesses are still not quite out of the woods, and that includes innovative forms of capital, extending and ensuring that existing capital is equitable, and considering that small businesses probably still need grants in the form of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and other forms that really get to the small businesses who need it the most. And so while I think that there is a sense of some relief among small business owners, they're still looking for these innovative policies, including among tech regulation.
Yeah, Michael, this seems like a perfect question for you. We've talked a lot about competition, some about privacy. What are the other domains that either small businesses are telling you they find they need to prepare for, or you're sort of in your guard dog form telling them that they need to get ready for and see kind of coming down the line, maybe particularly in the States?
In the States, again, the trend toward regulation of not just privacy, but other issues like internet speech on a state-by-state basis. If you're a small business, it's quite scary, right? And if regulation proceeds in this way, then the result is going to be to entrench the market leaders who have the resources and lock small businesses out. So again, issues like privacy, issues like internet speech, issues like content moderation, these are national issues, and they got to be dealt with on a national level. Otherwise, small business would be hurt the most. In terms of other things that we can do to promote small business, it's not a regulatory issue, but change our immigration laws so that the best and the brightest, the most innovative can come here and start small businesses or work for small businesses, right? I mean, it would if we could stimulate a brain gain. That would promote big businesses, small business. Right now, you hear these stories about talented computer scientists and PhDs leaving Ukraine, leaving Russia. Where are they going? They're all going to the EU. And that's in a perfect world, they would be coming to the United States to start their companies here and create jobs here. So I think a smarter immigration policy is something that would benefit our economy as a whole, but especially benefit small business.
Great. We're a few minutes from the end here, so I just want to take you guys through maybe a lightning round, maybe a sentence or two to answer these, a little more if you need. And I have a few of them. So the first one I want to ask is, do you find that the businesses you are hearing from primarily have faith in Congress to legislate on these issues? And are they more worried about inaction or bad action? I'm sorry. Why don't I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think that there is some hope among them, but there's a sense sometimes that Congress doesn't have the best interests of small business owners at heart, which is why organizations like Small Business Majority try and do regular research to make sure we're advocating on behalf of their feelings.
Michael?
The small businesses that I talk to are focused 24/7 on building their businesses and not focused on Washington as it should be, right? They shouldn't have to be focused on and worried about Washington. To the extent they do think about it, I think their top worry is that Congress will do something in a hasty and ill-advised way and will make a law that will inadvertently choke off or smother future innovation.
Christine?
Yes, I mean, we do have confidence in the regulations being considered. The House did a lengthy 2-year investigation and series of hearings. We think they've heard from a lot of small businesses, though it's great the more and more they hear from. But yeah, I feel like we do have some maybe things we would advise to do differently, but overall I would say we do.
Gotcha. All right. Lightning round question 2. If you could make a recommendation to lawmakers, what would you tell them is the most urgent tech policy issue that they're behind on?
I'm happy to start again.
Yeah, we'll take it in the same order.
Well, I think what they're behind on is passing Senator Klobuchar's bill. We know that self-preferencing and those sort of predatory practices, small business owners oppose and want to see some change on.
Right.
So I was watching the markup for the House antitrust package. It was a 24-hour markup. And I have this distinct memory of watching the debate at 4 o'clock in the morning, where members of Congress did a debate over like, who does this cover? What does this do? And thinking like, oh my gosh, China has a 10-year plan to achieve technology dominance, which they're investing in and moving quite rapidly toward. And here we are trying to restructure a large portion of the U.S. economy at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I would say the first thing I would do is do no harm, like understand what you're doing and regulate with a light touch. So again, you're not choking off innovation. And number 2, give us clear rules and clear guidelines for technologies of the future, like self-driving cars, like AI, like financial innovation and cryptocurrencies, because without rules, small businesses especially cannot invest in those new areas and build businesses and make them go forward. So we think that's what Congress should be focusing on.
Christine, the most urgent issue that lawmakers are behind on.
Well, I would echo what Westa said, that the antitrust legislation is, I guess they're just behind in terms of the legislative calendar. They're on it, but the clock is ticking. So I think that's a top priority, and I think that it's important to unleash the innovation that is in startups. That's where the fresh new ideas come from.
Okay, and one last, so Wes, we'll start with you again. What do you think is the tech policy issue that smaller business are going to be grappling with if we were to meet again in a year? And you're all invited, I'm sure.
You know what? I feel like a lot of small businesses are still trying to figure out ways to pivot online. Some of the resources that they we're using to sort of help them do that are not always shared widely or in underserved communities. And so I think what a lot of folks will be grappling with in a year as we sort of continue to shift business operations online is how to do that in a way that supports their bottom lines, but also ensures that they're understanding what they're signing on to, that they're not being taken advantage of, and basically able to operate a scalable business to support their employees and their communities.
Michael, small business issues that companies will be grappling with when we meet again in a year.
I'm going to be an optimist, and I'm going to say that small businesses are going to be very happy because Congress, in its wisdom, moved forward and passed a smart nationwide privacy framework. Also, perhaps rules involving transparency and rules and processes and terms of service, and avoided any new laws that would prevent small businesses from selling their businesses to larger companies, or prevent them from engaging in other common business practices. That's my optimistic take.
That's Christine. Are you offering the pessimistic take?
No, a slightly different optimistic take. Yeah, I hope we have privacy legislation too. I think it's more likely that we get antitrust legislation. I hope that a year from now, small businesses will be thinking about what different ways to reach their users, different ways to improve their offerings, rather than focusing on dealing with 30% app store tax, dealing with the self-preferencing and default practices. So I think I'm hopeful that the focus will be on the products and the services rather than the app store and other platform policies.
All right. Well, if any of that comes to pass, I'll be happy to ask any of you about it. That seems like a pretty great place to end, though. So I want to thank Awesta Sarkash, Christine Bannon, Michael Petricone, and of course, thank all of you for tuning in.